birthday cake was 3 layers, yellow with white frosting, the kind my daughter knew I'd been making for every family occasion since before she was born. She'd ordered it from the bakery on Clement Street, the one we'd gone to together for 20 years. And when I saw the box on the counter that morning, I thought, this is going to be a good day. I was 69 years old. I wasn't asking for much. I'd moved to Savannah 6 years earlier, after my husband passed. The house in Ohio felt too big without Bernard, too quiet in a way that pressed against my chest every morning. My daughter had called me every day for 2 weeks after the funeral, crying, telling me she wanted me closer. She and her husband had the space. They had a guest room that nobody used. She said, "Mama, I don't want you to be alone." I believed her. That was my first mistake, not believing her love, because the love was real. My mistake was believing that love and intentions always move in the same direction. They don't. I know that now. So I sold the house in Ohio, got a fair price for it, more than I expected, honestly. Bernard and I had paid it off 12 years before he died, and the market had been generous. I put most of it in savings, kept some liquid the way my late husband always said to, "Never let anyone know the whole number, Evelyn, not even family." And I drove down to Georgia with my cat, Biscuit, and 3 carloads of things my daughter kept calling clutter before I'd even unboxed them. The guest room was fine. Small, but fine. I had my own bathroom, a window that looked out over the backyard, and a fig tree that had no business being as beautiful as it was. I told myself this was a new chapter. I told myself the 63 wasn't too old to start over. By 69, I understood things I hadn't at 63. The birthday cake was on the counter when I came downstairs. My daughter was in the kitchen, already dressed, her hair done. Her husband. I'll call him what I called him to my friends, which was the son-in-law, because 6 years in, I still couldn't bring myself to call him by his first name with any warmth behind it. He was in the living room with his jacket on. Their 2 kids were by the door with shoes already tied. I said, "You all look ready." My daughter turned around and she had that look, the look I'd learned to recognize, the one where she'd already decided something and was about to explain it to me like I needed help understanding. She said they'd made a reservation, a nice place downtown. She said her husband's parents were coming, and his sister, and a few people from his office, and she'd thought it would be less stressful for me if they went and had dinner and then came back for cake. I stood in my robe and slippers in the kitchen I'd been cooking in for 6 years. I said, "Less stressful for who?" She said, "Mama, you know how loud restaurants get. You've said that yourself." I had said that once. About a particular Tex-Mex place with a live band on a Friday night. I had not said it as a standing policy about my own birthday dinner. I watched them leave, all 4 of them dressed up, the kids excited, my son-in-law holding the door without looking back. My daughter paused on the step and said they'd be home by 8, and we'd do the cake then, and it was going to be a lovely evening. The door closed. I stood in the kitchen for a minute, just stood there. Biscuit walked in from the hallway and looked up at me the way cats do, like they're waiting for you to explain yourself. I went upstairs and got dressed, put on the blue dress I'd bought the month before and had been saving. Did my hair, put on the pearl earrings Bernard gave me for our 30th anniversary. Then I went downstairs, cut myself a slice of that birthday cake, the first piece, the corner piece with the most frosting, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table alone and ate it while the afternoon light came through the window over the sink. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something quieter than sadness. It was the feeling of a thing becoming clear. I'd been feeling it for a while, that clarity. It came in small moments I'd been filing away without meaning to. The time my son-in-law made a comment at dinner about how people who just live off their savings don't understand the pressure of a mortgage. Said it to no one in particular, but I was the only person at that table who didn't have a mortgage. The time my daughter mentioned casually, that her husband's bonus that year had been disappointing, and they might need to revisit the household arrangement. I'd asked what that meant, and she'd said they could talk about it later, and we never did. The time I overheard her on the phone with her sister-in-law saying that things would be more manageable once everything got consolidated. I hadn't asked what that meant either. I should have. I finished my cake. I washed my dish and put it in the drainer. Then I went to the little desk I kept in the corner of the guest room. My room, I'd stopped calling it the guest room after the first year, and I sat down and did something I'd been putting off. I called my insurance agent, not because of the birthday. The birthday was just the day it finally made sense to stop waiting. 3 months earlier, I'd gotten a piece of mail that I'd opened without thinking much about it, a letter from my life insurance company, one of those annual summary statements. I'd looked it over the way I always did, scanning down the page, and then I stopped. The primary beneficiary line had a different name on it than the one I'd put there. I'd sat with that piece of paper for a long time. I'd gone back and forth with myself about whether I was misremembering, whether I'd changed it myself and forgotten, whether there was some kind of clerical error. I am 69, not senile, but I gave myself the benefit of the doubt because I didn't want to believe the alternative. I put the letter in my desk drawer and I told myself I'd look into it. That was 3 months ago. On my birthday, after my daughter and her husband took his family out for dinner without me, I opened the door and looked at the letter again. Then I called my insurance agent. She answered on the second ring. I told her my name and my policy number, and I asked her to tell me who was currently listed as my primary beneficiary. There was a pause, a short one. Then she read me a name. It wasn't my daughter's name. It was my son-in-law's name. I wrote it down even though I already knew it. I've always been the kind of person who writes things down. I thanked her, and I told her I'd like to make a change. She said she could send me the forms, or I could come into the office, and this was the one I chose. I could work with their online portal if I had my login. I did have my login. I'm 69, not a stranger to the internet. I spent 45 minutes on that portal. When I was done, my son-in-law's name was gone. My nephew in Cleveland, who'd called me every week since Bernard died and shown up with soup when I had the flu the winter before last, was listed as primary. My church's benevolence fund was listed as secondary. My daughter was not on the policy. That was a decision I made slowly, and I didn't make it out of anger. I made it because anyone who allows a situation like this to happen, whether they knew about it or not, has told me something important about where I stand, and I believe them. I sat at my desk for a while after that. I could hear the fig tree moving outside. Biscuit had come up and settled on the bed behind me, the way he did in the late afternoon when the light shifted. I thought about what I knew and what I still needed to find out. I thought about the phrase, everything got consolidated, and what that meant in practice. I thought about Bernard. He'd been an accountant for 30 years. He used to say that people who love you will always be happy for you to know the numbers. The ones who aren't happy about that, the ones who get quiet or defensive when you ask, they're telling you something. Pay attention, he'd say. Pay attention, he'd say. Pay attention. I paid attention. The next morning, I called my financial advisor. She'd been managing my investments for 11 years, since before Bernard died. I told her I wanted to review everything, every account, every beneficiary designation, every point of access. She asked if something had happened. I said I'd had some time to think and I wanted to make sure my house was in order. She didn't push. She scheduled me for the following Tuesday. I also called a real estate attorney. Not because I was certain what I was going to do, but because I wanted to understand my options. In Georgia, what I knew and what I could do about it were two different things, and I needed someone to explain the difference. My daughter came home that night around 8:30, slightly later than she'd said. She came in bright and a little loud, the way people are when they've had a glass of wine and a good evening, and she called out "Mama" from the hallway and came into the kitchen where I was sitting with my tea. She said, "We brought you something from the restaurant," and put a box on the table. A to-go container. From the nice place downtown. I looked at it. I looked at her. She said, "They had this salmon you would have loved. I had them box them up." I said, "Thank you." I said it the way my mother taught me to say it. Complete, no trailing off, no questions attached to it. Just thank you. My daughter looked at me for a moment like she wasn't sure what to do with that. She said the kids were tired and she was going to get them to bed, and we could do the cake tomorrow night maybe. Was that okay? I said that was fine. She went upstairs. I sat at the kitchen table for another hour. I didn't open the to-go container. The Tuesday appointment with my financial advisor went the way I expected, which is to say it went worse than I'd let myself believe. Not dramatically worse, just quietly, steadily, in a direction I didn't like. 2 of my accounts had a second signatory added, not a co-owner, not a beneficiary, a signatory. The kind of access that lets someone make certain kinds of changes, initiate certain kinds of transfers, under the right circumstances. I asked when that had happened. She showed me the paperwork. 14 months ago, I had apparently signed something. And here is where I have to be honest with myself, because I did sign something. I remembered signing something. A form my daughter had brought to me one evening and said was for estate planning purposes. And I had been reading a book and I had trusted her and I had not read it carefully enough. That is on me. That is mine to carry. But I could also do something about it. I removed the second signatory from both accounts that day. My financial advisor walked me through it. It took about 20 minutes and a notarized form, and I sat in her office and watched it happen. She asked if I wanted to talk about next steps. I said yes. We talked for 2 hours. I left with a plan and a referral to an elder law attorney, which is a specific kind of attorney I hadn't known existed before that day, and which I strongly recommend every person over 60 know about. They handle exactly this kind of situation. They know the language and the documents and the ways that well-meaning and not so well-meaning families can create arrangements that don't serve the older person at all. I met with that attorney the following week. I brought my documents. She was thorough and she was direct, and she did not make me feel foolish for not having caught this sooner. She said what I'd done so far was exactly right, and there were a few other things we could put in place. I also started looking at apartments. Not right away, not that week, but I drove by a 55-plus community about 4 miles from where my daughter lived. It had a waiting list. I put my name on it. I want to be clear about something, because I think people assume this kind of decision is made out of bitterness, and it wasn't. It was made out of clarity. There's a difference. I love my daughter. I loved a little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest watching Saturday morning cartoons. I loved the woman she became, even the version of her that let things get to where they got. I don't know how much she knew. I don't know how much she was led by her husband and how much she agreed. I may never know. That question stopped keeping me up at night somewhere around the 3rd week after my birthday, and I think that's healthy. What I know is this: I am 69 years old. I spent 41 years making a home, raising a family, working, saving, doing the things you do when you believe you're building towards something. I am not done building. I am not done living. And I will not spend whatever time I have left feeling like a guest in my own story. The apartment came available faster than they'd said. 6 weeks after I put my name on the list, they called. A 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor with a small balcony and east-facing windows that let in the morning light. I said yes on the phone before I'd even seen it in person. I told my daughter 2 days before the move. I had already hired movers. I had already arranged for Biscuit's vet records to be transferred to a practice closer to the new place. I had already called my nephew and told him what was happening, and he'd driven down from Cleveland to help me pack. the same way he always showed up when I needed him. My daughter cried. She said she didn't understand. She said she thought things had been going well. She said her husband had only been trying to help, that the accounts were just a precaution, that I'd misunderstood. I listened to all of it. I didn't argue with any of it. I didn't have to. When she finished, I said, "I know you love me. I've never doubted that." I said, "But I need to live somewhere that's mine. That is the whole reason." She hugged me when I left, long and hard the way she used to when she was small. I held on just as long. Then I got in my car and followed the moving truck down the street, and I watched my son-in-law's face through the front window of the house as I drove away. He was watching me go. I didn't look back. Not because I was angry, because I was looking at where I was going. My nephew helped me set up the bedroom first, the way I always do. Once the bed is made, everything else is manageable. We found a spot for Biscuit's bed by the balcony door where he could watch the birds. My nephew ordered pizza, and we sat on the floor eating it because the table wasn't assembled yet, and we laughed about something small, and it felt like relief. That night, after he went to the hotel down the road, and I was alone in the quiet of a place that was entirely mine, I opened the balcony door just a little. The night air came through, not cold, just cool enough. The kind of evening where you can hear things settling down, the neighborhood, the day, yourself. I've had good days since then. I've had some hard ones too. I don't want to tell you this was all easy, because it wasn't, and it isn't. There are still mornings when I think about the fig tree in that backyard and how I'll never see what it looks like in September. There are still moments when my phone rings and I see my daughter's name, and something in me wants to go back to before I knew what I knew, but I don't, because I also know what's possible now. I know what it feels like to sit with your coffee on your own balcony on your own Tuesday morning with nowhere you have to be and no one you have to explain yourself to. I know what it sounds like when the only name on the lease is yours. I'm 69 years old. And for the first time in a long time, everything in my life is exactly where I put it.